Hi there. I'm glad you tuned in today. I am Jen David Lang, host of the Main Idea podcast, and I have a special guest for you here today. Doug Reeves is known throughout the world because of his very deep impact that he has had on schools and, in particular, the work of school leaders. You've probably already heard of him, or perhaps worked with him, or read his books and articles. But Doug Reeves is a lifelong teacher. He has taught every level from primary grades through postdoctoral level students. I learned from Doug in just about every written piece he has ever put into the world. He is prolific, written over 40 books, over 100 articles. I have summarized some of Doug's books. I summarized 100 Day Leaders, which is one of my favorite books about change. I also summarized From Leading to Succeeding and also Elements of Grading. I think Doug was the first person who truly challenged my thinking about grading and introduced me to more equitable and effective grading practices. If you email me, I'm happy to share these summaries, Jen at themainidea.net. Doug even hosted a book launch party in his home when Kim Marshall and I published our first book. But I was so committed to working with students in New York City that day that I had to attend virtually. So thank you for doing that. Anyway, I love your work, Doug. I'm honored that you're here today to talk about one of your more recent books, Fearless Schools, Building Trust and Resilience for Learning, Teaching, and Leading. Welcome to the podcast, Doug.
That's so kind of you. I really appreciate your introduction and your kind words.
Definitely. Well, I appreciate you. So this book I chose, usually I choose very recent books, but you published Fearless Schools in 2021, smack in the middle of the pandemic.
Yes.
So what gave you the idea to write about fearless schools and what is a fearless school?
Well, I before I start, I always need to honor the scholarship of other people who really originated these ideas. And Amy Edmondson at the Harvard Business School was the author of the Fearless Organization, and Amy's work came from hospitals. And what she noticed is the hospitals that have high error rates actually have lower death rates because they're fearless. They're willing to talk about their mistakes, willing to not have their mistakes shoved under the rug. And what Amy also did was to expand her research into everything from operating rooms to airline cockpits. And so I attempted to adapt her work to schools because the bottom line is when people are afraid, they can't learn. So I always owe a debt of scholarship to her, and that's my launching pad. So what motivated me to do that is that not only during COVID, but before that, there was a pervasive sense of fear in schools. And it's not just kids, you know, teaching evaluations, leadership evaluations create a climate of fear. And that's what I'm militating against.
Mm, mm. Yes, I know. I think you're right. I think there's so many areas. Families are afraid to come into schools, right? Teachers
Exactly.
afraid of missteps. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. A big theme or a big takeaway I got from your book is that leaders really need to build fearless schools despite living in a fearful environment. And this book really resonated for many people because of the fear that the pandemic engendered. But now we're living in a time of great instability from wars, climate change, the deep chaos we're seeing in our own country. Are you hearing from principals or district leaders that the ideas in this book are resonating today? And we're recording this the fall of 2025.
Well, they are. And one reason is that you literally have principals who are afraid that ICE agents will come to the door and demand to take away a fourth grader. And they've got to have the courage to say, no, you can't come in here. And I think there's varying degrees of responsibility of building level administrators who are willing to say, no, you can't come into this school. Get a lawyer,
Yeah.
get a warrant, but you can't come in here. But it's not just that. It's the day-to-day work of teachers fearing that every time they hear the footsteps come down the hallway and they'll say, kids, okay, you know the drill. The principal's coming to watch. So, Maria, I'm going to call on you because I know you got the answers. Everybody else, pretend like you're paying attention to me. That's a fearful environment.
Yes.
The fearless environment is where everybody knows that it's okay to make a mistake.
Yeah.
In fact, little kids will make mistakes joyfully.
Mhm.
And they love catching the teacher in a mistake. They love catching adults in a mistake. That's the fearless environment that we want to go back to. The same, by the way, is true for adults. I fear that in too many faculty meetings, everybody sits there as mute because they're afraid if they say something that's contrary to policy, contrary to the leader's intuition, that they'll be shamed. And a fearless environment is the opposite of shame and embarrassment.
Yeah.
It's okay to make a mistake. It's the same for kids, it's the same for adults.
Yeah, it sounds like that hurts productivity and in a fearful school and no one wants to be there, right?
Exactly.
Teachers don't want to be teaching in a fearful school. Students don't want to be learning in a fearful school. And I wanted to add about the ice example. It's not just a fear of it potentially happening, but it is happening. I have a Chicago public school principal who's in one of my mastermind groups, and she missed our last session because ICE came in and took a Chicago public school employee. And so she's dealing with the fallout, among her staff in trying to support them in this truly fearful environment, not just the potentials, but the actual what's happening. So given this fearful environment that we're living in and on a global, national, and local level, the first part of your book is about trust in schools, right? Why trust is important, how to build and then maintain trust. Why is trust so important? What does trust have to do with fear? And how much time and effort should our leaders be putting into building trust?
Well, I'm really indebted to the scholarship of Kouzes and Posner, who wrote the book Credibility, because, one of the things that trust can be a very ambiguous concept, but they put a lot of clarity on it. And that is, you just do what you say you're going to do. For example, at our last meeting, I promised you that I'd bring you this data. Here it is. Promises made, promises kept.
Yeah.
At our last meeting, you all said that you'd bring in authentic student work. By golly, you all did it. Promises made, promises kept.
Mm.
That's what trust and credibility is. It's not ambiguous. It's very clear. Do what you say you're going to do. And I've been in PLC meetings at the building level where um, and it's up to the principal to call people on it. You said you were going to bring this last week. You didn't. Let's do it right now. So I just think we need to have a culture of keeping our promises.
Yes, I mean, I think when we're living in a time where there are many promises that are not being kept
Yes.
in the larger world, how can we do that on a micro level within our schools and model that, hold ourselves accountable and hold each other accountable? You wrote in your book that fear is the thief of trust. So it must be even harder
Yes.
in these times to be building the trust when people are fearing. Um,
Well, that's a really important insight because all we can do is control what's within our power. I can't control what the school board does or the legislator does or for that matter, the Congress does.
mm,
All I can control is what my colleagues and I do at a third grade level meeting, at a PLC meeting. Let's just focus on what we can control.
Yes. Yeah. And you also say in the book that leaders don't build trust with orations and slogans, but by their personal example, just the
Yes.
small, everyday decisions, habits, actions, and you give some good, really concrete examples. I mean, small things like, um, how we share data with
Yes.
our teachers and our staff members, that there's a way to do it that's obviously incredibly humiliating, but there's also a way that builds toward learning. I don't know
That's
if you want to, yeah,
such a thoughtful contrast that you just made, because I've heard teachers say that data are weaponized
yeah,
and used against them, and that's what creates a climate of fear.
yeah,
But when it's done constructively, say, look, the past is the past. For example, the example that I use is data is like, the weather. We can't control what the weather is. What we can control is our response to the weather. If it's 15 degrees outside and you send kids out there without mittens and gloves and hats, that's on us. But but the 15-degree part is not our fault. We just have to focus on how we respond. So, for example, right now we got a bunch of kids who are reading below grade level. If we know that, then if the fact that they're reading below grade level is not on us, but the fact that we're not responding to it and that we're not getting the time that we need and the attention that we need to deal with the reading deficit, that's on us.
Mm.
So there's a big difference between the data and our response to data.
So it sounds there's a lot of different ways to build this trust, right? You know, you started with doing what you say you're going to do, and then it's responding to data as opportunities for learning and for growth and for addressing some of the issues that we all care about, like literacy and learning. Um, you also talk about the way leaders treat staff and teacher independence and discretion. And so you would think in this fearful time as leaders, we might grab on and micromanage what everyone's doing in the school. But you say that's the opposite of what will lead to trust.
I did an interesting study about the difference between what teachers perceive their authority is and
Mm,
what their real authority is.
mm,
And what drives them crazy is that they think, oh God, I'm micromanaged all the time.
mm,
Only a few percentage points of my decisions are discretionary. And when I actually analyzed it, it came out to the fact that about 30% of their decisions were discretionary.
yeah,
But but what drives teachers crazy is if I think it's non-discretionary and then I don't realize that until April, it's pretty darn frustrating. If I understand right up front, and this is on administrators, right up front, be really clear about what decisions are discretionary, what decisions are collaborative, like common formative assessments, and what decisions are top down.
yeah,
The perception is that everything's top down. But in this study, only 27% of decisions were top down. And as one teacher told me, we don't want to vote on fire drills. If it's a safety and value issue,
yes, yeah.
I expect the administrator to make the call. They just need to make that clear up front.
Yes, yes. Oh, I remember many years ago when I was teaching, and it was our decision whether kids could wear baseball caps or not. And there were many more important decisions to be making, and we didn't feel very empowered. But yes, I think you're right. That's a really good distinction. It's not just, you know, giving teachers some autonomy where they should, but also being noisy about it and making sure they know. Because you cited a study that people would give up a 20% raise in order to get more autonomy on the job. So that's not a decision school leaders have autonomy versus raise, but it just shows how much they value autonomy. So we need to look for those places where teachers can have autonomy and name them and make sure that they are aware of when they can do that. And
But
uh,
where this really comes out is in curriculum, because teachers
yes,
are very proud of curriculum that they have developed, but then they feel that they're in a straitjacket. Well, it's not an either or proposition.
yes,
You follow the rules. There is state mandated and district mandated curriculum, but that doesn't stop the opportunity for creativity.
yes,
As long as administrators are willing to say, "Hey, I know that there's 40 minutes allocated to this. If you need 60, take 60."
yeah.
And we really respect and appreciate the value that you add to this particular social studies curriculum or whatever it is.
Yes. Yeah. No, it seems like there's a lot of small ways to demonstrate that type, build trust in those ways.
Precisely.
One suggestion you gave, which I didn't necessarily think of, was listening. You share listening as an example of another way to build trust. And you know, many leaders are leaders because they're good at speaking, right? And leading in an outward way. So it can be hard to listen. I never even thought of it until you mentioned it, but listening actually cedes power to the speaker, like the person you're speaking to. So, what is the connection between listening and building trust?
There's some really good evidence on that.
Yeah.
It's like the old pardon me, African talking stick that, when you give the talking stick to somebody else, it means you got to be quiet
Yep.
and listen. And it doesn't mean that they have to agree with you or affirm you, but it affirms an equality of voice that is really important to build a solid team. And part of fearlessness, just like in a classroom, where it's okay for kids to disagree with each other. It's got to be the same true in a faculty meeting
Yeah.
where we're not going to necessarily agree, but we got to make sure that people have the opportunity to listen. I would just add parenthetically that this is a generational issue. I've had some senior leaders tell me that there are 20 somethings who are in their office in tears saying, well, you don't respect me. I said, what do you mean? I respect everybody. Well, you didn't accept my suggestion. Well, that's that's the nature of the world. And one of the obligations of leaders is to say, we love you, we respect you, but we're not always going to agree with you.
Yes. And you can acknowledge the feedback and say, I
Yes.
heard you, but I can't do this at this time for this reason. And maybe our younger, Gen Zers need
Yeah,
that kind of an explanation.
exactly.
Um, so let's talk about feedback and trust. So these are tough times, as we've said. So shouldn't school leaders and principals just go soft on teachers when giving feedback? Wouldn't that build trust during these times?
I don't think that's what the evidence says. The evidence says that actually people love feedback. And the exercise that I would recommend your listeners consider is I ask them, what's the best and most effective feedback you've ever received?
Mm,
And I do this with parents too. And invariably, what they'll say is, well, the kind of feedback that I want is feedback that is fair,
yep.
that is accurate. So I know that it really reflects my performance, specific and timely. So give me the feedback the same day, not the three suits in the back of the classroom, but same day, let me know exactly what you saw. That's what people want. They don't fear feedback. They just fear the absence of feedback. In fact, when I surveyed teachers and I asked them what's the best and worst feedback you've ever had, invariably what they say is the worst feedback is no feedback at all.
Yep.
So uh, it's okay to give feedback, including specific feedback, as long as it's fair and accurate, specific and timely. The acronym that I use is FAST, fair, accurate, specific, and timely, because they can take it, but they need to know that it's fair.
I love a good acronym. It helps us remember. Yeah, and you write in the book that every great teacher that you know craves feedback.
Yes.
And I think that is true. And particularly, I've been hearing that Gen Zers are particularly craving feedback themselves. So, given that these times of crisis are already threatening honesty and candor, we need to make sure in schools that we are going out of our way
Yeah.
to be honest. And as Brene Brown says, clear is kind. And the feedback can be clear. It can also be compassionate and kind, but it should be um, accurate, fast feedback.
I should just add as a footnote, it's not just Gen Z.
Yeah.
The our veteran teachers who are most experienced, really expert, they crave feedback as well. And I think sometimes what administrators do is they over observe new teachers who are having trouble, and they under observe our veteran teachers who are experts. But the experts need love too.
Yep.
And I think it's really important that we allocate our feedback resources across the entire building.
Yeah, they need love and improvement, right? There's always room to improve. Nobody has mastered the art of teaching completely in at least my lifetime. I assume yours too. Um, so yeah, these high trust schools or organizations that you describe are really learning organizations. And
Yeah.
so when we think about the opposite, as you were describing earlier in the podcast, fearful organizations are ones where people don't learn because people are afraid of making mistakes, right? So think about that teacher who wants to try something new or dreams of, diving into project-based learning, but if it's within the context of a school where there's a lot of fear, they're simply not going to do that, and that will be to the detriment of them, their career, and their students as well.
Well, you're exactly right. And that this is particularly important for high poverty schools where you can have five administrators in 5 years. There's this constant turnover, so nobody knows, who's really in charge.
Yeah. Wow. Okay, well, there's a lot about trust in the first part of the book, and the second part of the book is about resilience. That is, bouncing back when there is great disruption or change, as we're seeing now. So, for leaders who run schools where teachers and staff are feeling the impact of this great disruption and change, what are some strategies that our leaders can use to support the building of resilience among their staff to help them bounce back?
Well, one of the things that I did in the course of this research was to interview ultra athletes.
Mm,
I've I've run 7 marathons, although I don't look like it anymore.
congratulations.
I think. But I interviewed this ultra athlete, Dr. Harold Volkamer, and he said something really interesting. He said, when you get hurt, you invest as much time in your recovery as you do in your training.
Hmm.
Because that was the opposite of my presupposition. I thought recovery meant, oh my God, I can take a break. I can sit in the lazy boy with a remote control and in a beer. Dr. Volkmer said that that is not what recovery is all about. You work really hard in recovery. Similarly, what I think the applicable issue for schools is that every school I've ever been in has people who have been models of resilience, either
Mm,
physical resilience, they had an injury or an
mm,
illness,
mm,
emotional resilience,
mm,
organizational resilience.
mm,
So let your faculty tell their own story. You don't have to
mm,
listen to me.
mm,
They've got stories of resilience, and when they tell them, it's emotionally compelling.
mm.
And we can all learn from those things. And it's so much more credible when we learn them from uh, their colleagues than from some outsider.
I like that because it also involves, as the leader, you have to know your staff well enough to pull out those stories to share them. And then
Exactly.
certainly as the leader, if you were the leader of your school during the pandemic, right, you can certainly bring people back to that recent time in history that here was this change that we thought was going to wipe out, huge part, it did kill many people, but we thought it was going to wipe out schools as we knew them and humanity. And what are the things? Let's remind ourselves, let's tell the story of how we bounced back from that. How did we come together? And what did
Exactly.
we do there too? So have other people tell their stories or you tell your stories. Um, Other things that help with either individuals or organizations in thinking about um, bouncing back. Earlier, you talked a little bit about focusing on things that you can control, and I know that's a great way to focus on being resilient in the face of stress. Do you have an activity or something you do with that, or?
Here's an activity that I think is really good for faculty, and that is I just ask this open-ended question: what are the causes of student success and failure?
Mm,
And they've all got these names, and I have them write a separate cause
mm,
on each piece of paper. Maybe the cause is poverty, maybe the cause is attendance, maybe the cause is teacher engagement, maybe the cause is relationships. Let them go. And after about 15 minutes, you'll have a big stack of papers, take a coffee break,
mm,
and then you organize them in 3 piles. Pile one are things I cannot control because there's a lot of stuff out, I can't control if kids are awake at 3 o'clock in the morning on social media. Can't control if a seventh grader shows up at school stoned. I can't control a lot of things that are hunger, although I can influence that.
mhm,
So that's pile one. Pile two, I can influence it, but I can't control it. And
mm,
here's where some controversial issues come up. Like people think, well, attendance, heck, there's nothing I can do. Yes, there is. I've
mm,
seen amazing teachers and administrators
yeah,
dramatically improve attendance rates, not because they bust into their home and take the kids out of bed, but they've done really creative things to improve attendance rates, including instead of robocalls in the afternoon, immediate, like 1 minute calls as soon as school opens.
mm,
So that's number two. I can influence it, but not control it.
mm,
And number three, things that I absolutely influence, relationships, curriculum, relevance of what I do in the classroom.
mm.
And what we need to do is to keep those papers in the wall. And every time we meet, we're going to focus on pile two and pile three, what I can influence and what I can control. And we're not going to spend time on pile one, things I cannot control.
And then it seems like for the things that they can influence, setting small achievable goals and celebrating wins when they happen.
Absolutely. And it's very empowering. And attendance is the primary issue here. a lot of, well, if they don't show up, there's nothing I can do. Actually, there's a lot we can do it with creative solutions for the issue of attendance. And that includes literally shifting the time of notification. I've the best idea I've heard is instead of robocalls in the afternoon, robocalls in the morning. Hey, good morning. It's 6 o'clock. Time to come to school. If you need help on transportation, give us a call. If you're not feeling well, give us a call. Otherwise, we expect to see you bright and early at 8 o'clock. And I think those sorts of things that are non-accusatory, we're not going to call the truant officer, but we really expect to hear. And one middle school principal that I know literally got her faculty back from 50% attendance to pre-COVID levels, more than 90% attendance, with only two messages. We miss you and we need you.
Yes.
Not a
Yes.
threat, just we miss you and we need you.
Yeah, well, particularly when teachers who are not robots reiterate that as the student comes into the classroom for the first time after being out for 5 days, as opposed to, where have you been? You missed so much, something more positive.
Exactly.
Um, No, so in the same way that you suggest that teachers think about what they can influence, control, and have no control, leaders can obviously do this exercise too. And when you think about the category of what do leaders have complete control over, I'm sure many leaders are thinking, what do I have complete control over? Well, of course, they have complete control over themselves, right? If they want to set their alarm for a half hour earlier and start the day on their own terms, whatever that looks like. And some of those self-care habits that I know leaders are all tired of hearing about from the pandemic. But that's sort of where I go to when I think about leaders and what they can control. Is that what you had in mind when you think about building resilience?
I would just add parenthetically,
Yeah.
one of the enemies of resilience
Mm,
is toxic grading practices where they use the average to say, hey, it's May, it doesn't make any difference what you do. I'm going to punish you for what you did 90 days ago. And
mm.
I think leaders have an obligation to say that is toxic, that is unfair, and we're not going to allow it. And I do think that's an area where leaders need to assert their authority to get rid of the average and say, our policy is that we will evaluate students on how they finish the race, not how they started it. And that means we're going to evaluate you at the time that the grade is awarded. And if I could pick one thing, because there are 400-page books being written about grading policy, way too complicated. All you need to do is to stop using the average and let students know that no matter where you are, you're going to be evaluated at how you finish the race.
And I'm sure some people wouldn't even think of using the word toxic for grading policies. They don't really think of them as having that much of an impact, but they certainly do for many reasons. And you have a book on fearless grading as well, which
Yeah.
we can mention at the end. The only last thing, one of the things in the resilience section that you talk about is that it's helpful to anticipate changes and disruptions. So we're not surprised. I mean, clearly anyone would say, how could I have anticipated COVID-19, right? And I'm thinking about changes like the changes AI is going to bring to schools, is bringing
Yeah.
to school, and some of this political instability that no one thought this would be happening to, our democratic government. Does it still work to anticipate the changes that are coming when we could not have imagined AI like this 5 years
Well,
ago?
I think we can, and that's a great example. I have a new book coming out in next month called The Ethical and Effective Use of AI. And frankly, a lot of what's happening in AI is way overcomplicated and it's intimidating to a lot of teachers. And teachers that I interviewed, more than 60% are against it. They say AI is a cheating machine
Mm,
and it's going to undermine, what I do as a teacher. So what I try to do in this book is to say there's a bad way and an ethical way to use AI. And I offered some very specific suggestions on the ethical use of AI. Moreover, it's there. The kids are using it no matter what. The
mm.
idea that people are afraid of it and oppose it is folly. So it reminds me, I'm old enough to know when people thought that would be true of calculators.
Yep.
And uh, and AI is going to be the same way. Kids are going to use it. So it's our job as educators to say, excuse me, what is the ethical and effective use of AI? Because they're going to go into an AI world, but we need to teach them how to use it ethically and effectively.
And I think, even though your book doesn't mention AI by name, or maybe it did, I don't remember. Um, I think that it's the same. We have to acknowledge as leaders that our teachers and our staff members are experiencing fear on that level as well.
Yes.
Was surprised that you just cited such a high statistic of teachers who are against it. And I imagine some part of them being against it is they're afraid. And there is a lot of fear for everything from I'm afraid AI is going to take my job to I'm afraid it's going to be a mountain of work to redo my whole curriculum and AI proof it so kids can't be cheating. So there's a lot of fear, and I imagine that a lot of the strategies in this book you suggest help to address that as well.
Well, in this book, I provide examples of AI created curriculum. Give me the, Arizona State curriculum uh, on the Reconstruction movement, and use Arizona standards and provide sample assessments, and it does it immediately. I think it takes some work uh, off of teachers' shoulders. And the other thing that I used constructively was when you're in a multilingual district, I was by some Native Nation reservations, and I said, give me parent letters in English, Spanish, Arapaho, and Shoshone, and it did it immediately.
Wow.
That's a sort of thing that saves huge amounts of time and then creates opportunities for more person-to-person contact.
Yes, which we need now. Yes. Well, it's a whole other topic. I won't get into AI, but your book is useful for thinking about that as well. So the first part of your book is about trust. The second part is about resilience. And the third part is about fearlessness in practice. And you say, it's easy to talk about fearlessness in theory, harder in practice. You
Yeah.
should give yourself some more credit. Your first two parts of the book had lots of practical ideas, but then on top of it, you have a whole third part with more practical ideas. So maybe it would be helpful to zoom into the classroom.
Okay.
Um, and you say that the classroom may be the only fearless space that a student has, right? They really depend on the classroom for honesty, candor, safety. So what are some things that teachers can be doing to create this trusting, fearless classroom?
Well, contrast a kindergarten classroom where the teacher will ask a question and every hand goes up. Everybody, is she going to call on me? Is she going to call on me? Everybody's excited, even if they make a mistake.
Mm,
They think mistakes are opportunity for joy and learning. But only a few years later,
mm,
a question goes out, and the only people whose hands go up are kids who already know the answer.
mm.
So, pardon me, the number one issue for creating a fearless classroom, and I'm seeing this more in secondary schools
Yeah,
as well as in college classrooms,
yeah.
is you got to do random calling, and
Hmm.
you got to do it in a safe, emotionally safe way.
Hmm.
That means, hey, if you don't know, if I call on you and you don't know the answer, you can phone a friend,
Hmm.
you can give me a partial answer, you
Hmm.
can answer a question with a question. But
Hmm.
what you cannot do is check out in my classroom. I've got to have 100% engagement.
Hmm.
And that is a really hard for a lot of teachers and students to do because kids don't like it.
Yeah,
But if you want to have a safe classroom,
yeah,
it's got to be a safe place to make a mistake.
yeah.
And when I advise administrators, what I say is, when you're observing a classroom, beware when the only thing you hear is right answers.
Mm,
That's not a safe place.
mm,
You have to have a observation where there are wrong answers, and wrong answers are respected and appreciated and lead to additional learning. Uh, Nancy Fry has a great observation when she says, um, the mistake we make is when there's a wrong answer, we immediately turn away and say, sorry, Nancy, now I'm going to go over here,
yeah.
which just diminishes and shames the person who had the wrong answer. What we want to do, as Goethe said, is linger thou a while, linger somebody with the wrong answer and watch real learning happen. I'll tell you who's a master at this is Eric Mazur
Mhm,
at Harvard.
mhm,
He's a science teacher, and he started doing that after, a 40-year career of giving brilliant lectures. Now what he does is calls on people, sees their answers and say, hey, you disagree with Miss Smith, tell her why she's wrong. And this debate ensues between students, not professor to student, but between students. And that's where the real magic of learning happens.
And his students' achievement has gone way up. So making
Absolutely.
creating a culture where errors are okay doesn't mean we're lowering our standards. It's actually increases learning. I mean, one of my favorite videos online, I'm sure you've seen it, is called My Favorite No, N-O. And it is a math teacher who gives a do now, collects all the answers on index cards, and then she chooses her favorite no. That is her favorite incorrect way to do the problem. And she projects it on the screen, no names or anything. And she says, I love that the student made this mistake because we're going to learn from it and it's going to help us
Right.
learn. If we didn't have the mistakes, then we wouldn't learn.
That's
Um,
brilliant. That's
so
really
yeah,
brilliant.
yeah, I'll send you that video if you haven't seen it. It's fantastic. But yeah, so I think that creating fearless classrooms, obviously creating a culture where it's okay to make mistakes is part of it, but it's something for leaders to think about as they observe classes. What are teachers doing to create fearless spaces? You know, what types of language are they using? Positive language and positive nonverbal cues. Are teachers sharing their own vulnerabilities? You know, I'm here learning too, admitting their own mistakes. Are they fusing peers with each other so that they know each other as people? Because you can't just make a mistake with people you don't know, right? So there's a lot of ways to build these types of fearless classrooms. You had something to add? Yeah.
Well, I was just, you inspired me. That's a really interesting observation. Clever teachers deliberately make mistakes and have students catch them.
Hmm.
And I see that in the younger grades, particularly, not so much in the older grades, but I think that is a great teaching strategy to have students always on the edge of their seat. And, am I going to catch her here? Am I going to catch him there? That's a great teaching strategy to have students always be thinking critically about how can I catch the teacher in a mistake.
Mm, yes, I love that. Faking your mistakes. Now, leaning into them. Well, you do also have a chapter on fearless leadership. And, you know, you say that fearless leadership isn't, you know, running around with, you know, positive, Pollyannish kind of
Yeah.
approach, but it's not about denying reality, but it's about creating the conditions for psychological safety, as Amy Edmondson has coined. And we really need leaders in our schools who are different from the leaders we're seeing elsewhere in society right now. We really do need these fearless leaders. And you talk about how they can project a fearless presence and they can engage in fearless communication. So maybe if we just talk about those last two terms and then we'll wrap it up. Yeah.
I would just say one of the most important thing that I've seen effective leaders do is appreciation. Uh,
Mm,
Ending every day with just a quick note,
mm,
literally on a 4x6 note card, appreciating somebody. And you will find those under the glass on a teacher's desk 5 years from now.
yes.
Um, and that doesn't mean that we're without uh, observations of how we can improve. It,
Yeah.
Being honest is part of that as well. In fact, when people think about the best feedback that they've ever received, or the best teacher that they ever had, it wasn't one that was free of feedback or free of criticism.
Mhm.
That's what made the appreciation note all the more effective and all the more meaningful.
Yeah. And it also, you know, right now we need leaders who are providing hope. And when you're appreciating a teacher, you are, in a sense, sharing hope that things can be better, that we can all make our small contributions and they're meaningful.
Yeah.
Um, all right, well, maybe we will end on that note. Sometimes I like to choose a single word or a phrase for the new year to give me focus in my personal and professional life. So I wonder if it would be a wonderful idea for educators to adopt the word fearless for 2026. I will be thinking about that. We talked about a lot, and so I like to leave listeners with a few brief main ideas to take away. So, Doug, can you share in any order one main idea from your book, one high leverage action leaders can take in the name of fearlessness, and one other resource to learn more about fearlessness?
The main idea is when people are afraid, they can't learn.
Mm,
I write in the book, about oxytocin. It's the enemy of learning. And Amy has said that, and I've said that. The fearlessness is requirement for learning, and
mhm,
that's as true for adults as it is for students.
mm,
So, number one, we have to make clear that a fearless environment is essential. It doesn't mean that we're free of criticism or free of judgment, but it's got to be free from embarrassment and shame,
mm,
because those are the root causes of fearlessness. So, number one, when people are afraid, they can't learn. With respect to high action, we have to identify what are the root causes
mm,
of fearfulness. And if I had to identify one root cause of fearfulness, it's toxic grading. It's the use of the average. You don't have to have a 5-year study of standards-based grading. You don't have to redo your report cards. You just have to get rid of the average. If you just do that, you'll have resilient students who know that no matter how much I messed up 2 months ago, I can still bounce back and get better. And by the way, the same is true of teacher evaluation.
yeah.
I grieve about these teacher evaluation systems that for a mistake made in October, people are punished in May.
Mm,
We always need the opportunity to bounce back and be resilient.
hmm.
So those are a couple of ideas I hope that
Yeah,
leaders would consider.
great. And then a resource, and also how can people learn more about you and your work? Where can they go?
Sure, there's a whole series on these. One resource is Fearless Coaching. Coaching is a very powerful impact. We've really moved away from traditional keynotes and traditional workshops to one-to-one or small group coaching. So Fearless Coaching is a resource that my colleagues contributed to, and I would encourage that. Um, my new book on the ethical and effective use of I think might be useful. Um, I've written a bunch of them, but those are at least a couple. And by the way, I'm not trying to sell books. If you go to creativeleadership.net, there's a number of free videos um, and free presentations that your listeners can find that they're welcome to use. And all of our research is free and can be distributed.
Great. So is that the best place for people to find out more about you and your work, creativeleadership.net?
Exactly.
Great. Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Doug. I always learn so much. You are full of anecdotes and stats and compelling reasons to make changes in schools. So thank you. Thanks everyone for listening. I'll be back in 2 weeks. And until then, learn more, lead better.